Do I need to know this on the test?
No, this is not test stuff. This is so you don't have to think you've got to drive an hour away to find this one field that this guy will let you fly out of. You can go operate out of an airport that's 20 minutes away. But you kind of need to know a little bit more than just taking off out of a soccer field. At little airports that only have one frequency allocated to them, the Unicom and the CTAF will usually be on the same frequency. As you get to a bigger airport, and the airport has more frequencies allocated, the CTAF will be on usually a different channel. So you see here at Franklin, we've got 1227, that's our Unicom, and traffic stuff goes on that channel too. That's what that little C is. Down here at Columbus, do you recall what type of airspace Columbus is? Blue dashed line around the airport.
C?
Close.
B?
Farther away? D, yeah.
Well, okay, C is 2 rings, D is that, and B is...
B is big, yeah. D is blue. D is like it's a perfect cylinder over the airport. It's not very complicated. Remember, blue means that there is a control tower. It's a controlled field, but not necessarily always controlled 365, 24/7, 365. I only point this out really quickly. Down here at Columbus, the Unicom frequency is 122.95, but the C is up on this top frequency, CT, which is the control tower. What that means is when the control tower is manned and there's an FAA controller in it, you tell him, there's a switchboard operator basically, you tell him what you're doing and he says go or no go. When he leaves, that airspace goes away, but we're still going to use the same frequency to announce our traffic intentions. We're not going to say the traffic intentions on the Unicom. Where at Franklin, we will be announcing traffic intentions because it's the only frequency we've got. So guard, emergency, Unicom and multicom, depending on whether the airport has a frequency or not, our admin channels and CTAF is the common traffic advisory frequency. One more thing about the CTAF, come down here and find an example. Yeah, here's a good example. So the reason it is called a common traffic advisory frequency is because these channels tend to be common. There's a narrow band out of the aviation band that we put these frequencies in, okay? What that means is, for example, North Vernon, the Unicom is 122.7. Franklin, the Unicom is 122.7. So is the CTAF. That means it would be possible for you to be up here in between the two airports talking on the frequency that both airports share, and your radio traffic is getting to both airports, okay? So these are common frequencies. You need to keep that in mind if you're using it. You may catch traffic from other airports because other airports share the same little narrow band of admin channels. And that also has a practical application because when we talk on the radio, we will begin and end the transmission with who we're talking to. Because if somebody hops in midstream on your transmission and they're at another airport, they can write you off or pay attention to you.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so I'll just go into the transmission. Really, military transmissions are really close to this. It's a good basis. You're going to say or hear who I'm talking to. So you, this is me, who I am, where I am, what I'm doing or what my intentions are, and then I repeat you or who I'm talking to. We're going to come back to this, but if you remember that basic protocol, you know, generally if you're going to use a radio, keep it brief. You know that from the military. Brevity's best. You don't want to get on and just talk about your dog or whatever. So that's a good rule for brevity. However, if you don't remember that, a lot of people have never talked on a radio at all before, and they stutter like they're talking to a teenage girl, like, you know what I mean? And they get tongue-tied. It's okay to talk in plain text and, you know, say, Franklin, I'm a powered paraglider in the grass over on the left side of the runway. That's the west side, and I'm getting ready to take off. Is anybody out there? So it's okay not to use that. You probably need comms. Most airport managers are going to ask you to have a radio on board if you're flying out of the airport. Not all of them, but like Robert, if we didn't know the area so well, if we just showed up, he wants people to have a radio. If you don't have a radio, you might be coming in to land across that runway and somebody's taking off on it.
Well, I understand the
You know,
importance of it,
yeah.
so I just wanted to know, is there something to look at?
It's a 90% yes, but maybe Westfield. Nobody's ever flying out of Westfield, and you don't need a radio.
But if I'm going to go to a more busy airfield.
Yeah, the busier it gets, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so we've got what frequencies we'll use on that radio, kind of the protocol for listening, and next we need to go into this where and what, and that's going to be really specifically noted by the pilots using the airport. So we need to kind of dissect the airport a little bit. We don't have a tail number. That's where the me would come in. Pick something, blue paraglider, PBG2, whatever. Since you don't have a tail number, you can just make something up. But I would make, if I'm going to use that, I'd make something up and use it all the time, so they got to know who you were. And if you're 5 miles away coming in, they'd know, oh, that's Mark. He's coming. He's on a glider. Okay. So we're going to look at Franklin, and so some things are happening around the airport. That is the purpose for the CTAF. It's Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. Common because we share frequencies. It's a frequency. The traffic advisory is the meat and potatoes of that. It is the channel that you're going to talk on to announce where you are and what you're doing, so the other pilots can hear it. And even if you think nobody else is listening, you're the only guy at the airport, you're still going to communicate on the radio as if someone's listening, because you never know, right?
Is this what you guys monitor on
Yeah.
the radios?
Anytime we have students up, 2 of us have an ab band radio on. Something else about that, in the smaller airports that we tend to fly at, there are a lot of older planes that may not have radios. So you want to do your best to use the radio, but you don't want to lapse into the complacency of thinking that everybody that's there is also doing it. They may not be using it, or they may not have it on board. Even fixed wing airplanes, some of these older ones, just because you don't hear it doesn't mean there's not somebody there. So you need to augment this with a really wide situational awareness around the airport. Okay, so an airport has a traffic pattern, and it kind of looks like that. And in this case, the airplane is taking off away from us, and we need to understand these little the yellow tags that are on there, because that's going to be what I'm doing. Before I can know that, though, I have to understand how a runway is laid out. So you've got numbers on the runway. Have I hinted enough here what the numbers on the runway means, or do you already know what the numbers on a runway are?
No, it's been too long.
Okay, so at Franklin, let's go back to our Franklin map here. Even though they're hard to see because they haven't painted for a while, I've diagrammed Franklin there. Grass strips won't have this, but you can see there's a 3 right there. What that is telling you is, if you were an airplane sitting right here, looking down the length of the runway, your magnetic compass heading would be 030. So we're dropping a 0. That means the other side of that runway is exactly 180 degrees off, which is 21, right? So we take 30 degrees off 210, we have a 180 degree difference. And this runway, if I were on the other side, looking down the length, I'd be pointing at 210 degrees. Okay? So it's important to remember that every runway is actually 2 different runways. And what makes a pilot pick which side of the runway to use?
The wind.
Wind direction, right. Whatever most advantageous use of the wind a pilot can get, that's how they do it. And really the first guy that gets there looks at the wind and says, okay, I'm in the traffic pattern, everybody else joins his pattern. This traffic pattern diagram, if you don't understand this, if you don't understand those 2 things and add it into your thought process, that won't make any difference, okay?
How do they denote like a 5 degree or 50 degree? I don't understand that. Is it 0, like runway
0.5? A 5 degree is probably going to be runway 1 or runway 36. I don't think they break it down.
Okay.
I've never seen like this would be 003. I've never seen increments in the runway that tight.
Do I need to know this on the test?
No, this is not test stuff. This is so you don't have to think you've got to drive an hour away to find this one field that this guy will let you fly out of. You can go operate out of an airport that's 20 minutes away. But you kind of need to know a little bit more than just taking off out of a soccer field. So our wind direction, our imaginary wind direction today is going to be out of the north. It's pretty similar to our diagram here. And before I can listen and understand these transmissions, I've got to pay attention to what runway would be in use. Usually if anybody's there, you just look and see what direction they're going, right? If nobody's there, look at the windsock. Wind's coming that way, they're going to go down to that end and take off into the wind. What is that runway? That's the basis for the transmission. If you don't understand the number that they're using, you won't know which way they're coming, okay? So in this case, the basis for our launching and landing operations on that runway is going to be 3, and we can just forget that 2-1 is there until the wind swapped and we needed to move to the other end of the runway. Okay, so this traffic pattern, by default, airports have left-handed traffic patterns. Unless there's something that says do a right-handed pattern, which I'll show you, it's pretty rare, you can just assume that it's like a NASCAR track. Every time they turn left until they come back to the starting point. So when the airplane is sitting on the runway and they're getting ready to take off, they'll get on the radio and say, Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, runway 3, I'll be departing and staying in the pattern, Franklin. That means they're on the ground ready to go. Off they go, they take off, and at a certain time, they know what it is depending on their airplane, they're going to make a left-hand turn. And that first left-hand turn is called the crosswind. So you would hear Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, turning crosswind for runway 3, staying in the pattern for touch and goes today, Franklin. Okay, and this is one of the 2 short legs. The short leg is over, we make another left-hand turn, and we are now on the downwind leg. This is upwind, that long leg's downwind. Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, turning downwind for runway 3, Franklin. Down we go. And then they make another left-hand turn. This is called the base leg. Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, turning base for runway 3. I'll be doing a touch and go, Franklin. And then as they get over here, back in line with the runway, they make their last turn. Of course, this is final approach, or usually just final. So Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, turning final for runway 3. I'll be full stop landing, or it'll be a full stop, Franklin.
And the pilot's going to announce every turn?
A pilot should announce every turn. In these smaller airports, a lot of times they don't announce, or they may announce one leg. If it's a student in the airplane, they're probably announcing everything.
The only reason I ask is when I was flying in this kind of setup, never made those announcements for every turn. We did the touch and goes and the laps.
Technically, you're supposed to. If you are at an airport and there's
20 years ago.
And there's 2 or 3 planes in the pattern, guys are going to be announcing everything because everybody else needs to know where you are and what you're doing because I can't see behind me, you know. But some of these little airports, people fall into the habit of not talking very much because they know nobody's out here. Good for you to know, though. If you haven't paid attention to what end of the runway is being used, nothing makes any sense, right? A guy may be saying Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, turning base, turning final, Franklin. If he doesn't tell you the runway he's using and you didn't think about, I have no idea what he's doing here, right? And you can fill that gap in by just looking at the windsock and knowing where the wind's coming from. Some other things they may say, Franklin traffic, 15 Juliet, back taxi. Back taxi means they're on the active runway. Let's say this guy comes into land. This is Franklin right here. That's where our little parking area is. He comes in and lands. There's no taxiway, so he has to turn around and drive backwards down the runway. That's a back taxi. It lets everybody know, hey, the runway is not clear right now. I'm driving down it. Another thing, if I don't know if you became aware of this yet, that big grass area on the other side of the runway is part of the runway. So don't go to an airport and think just that concrete is the runway and any grass on the sides is for me.
Oh, good.
A lot of these runways will land on the grass because it saves their tire. When those tires chirp down, it burns the rubber off. So like school planes, they take off on the asphalt, land in the grass to save their tires. But yeah, that grass over here you can't just go set up out there. You're in the runway. So that's planes in the pattern. By default, the pattern is a left-handed pattern. And occasionally, for some reason or another, the FAA or the airport manager or someone will say, we need something different. We can't have a left-handed pattern. In that case, there'll be a little tag below the normal last line that says RP9. That means right pattern on runway 9. Let's just pretend that was Franklin and it said RP21. Okay, so on runway 3, that is our traffic pattern. If it says RP21, if it doesn't say that, my traffic pattern on some days would be over here, and other days my left-hand turn takes me out here. But if I designate right pattern on one side, all days the traffic pattern winds over a certain part of terrain instead of always going left. So there may be a mountain here, or nothing but cornfields and a town. So for noise abatement, they push the traffic over. So it's not terribly common. Like in all these airports on the map right now, Noblesville is the only one, and just one end of the runway has a right pattern. But by default, it's left. If it doesn't say anything, you can assume it's left. So what about coming into and out of the airports? What are these planes going to do? Usually between 3 and 5 miles, as they're coming in, they'll announce that they're coming in. And they have interesting ways that they can hop into this pattern. But one of the ways is important for you when you're thinking about transiting an airport. Let's say up on the radio, Franklin traffic 15 Juliet, 3 miles to the west, inbound to land for runway 3, Franklin. Where is he? Way out here to the west. So as he approaches the airport, to land on this, he's going to fly in and he's going to join this pattern. And like really technically, they're supposed to go in a clover leaf, and that allows them to scan eyeballs, scan the entire pattern before actually hooking into it. But realistically, so that's what you're supposed to do. But what they normally do is just hook into it. So that is how you would join from that side. If you have to cross the runway to come in, if I heard Franklin traffic 15 Juliet 3 miles to the east, inbound to land runway 3, Franklin, I am going to assume that plane has to get over there, and the safest place to get there is right over the center of the runway. And again, technically that should be a cloverleaf out, but most of the time they just chop it. Why? Why is that the safest spot?
Because take off or landing, you've got this angle coming in and it leaves the most room.
Yeah, so there's our runway, planes taking off, have that approach or departure, planes coming in has that. That leaves this area up here as kind of a safe zone to transit the airport. These guys that are talking on the radio on their airplanes have a designated traffic pattern at 1,000 feet. And that is really this part of the pattern. When they look off their left shoulder and see the numbers, they start coming down. But this part of the pattern should be at 1,000 feet. In your thumb drive, there's a document that is for further reading. It's kind of, it's pretty in-depth, but it's worth reading. It's this one here, airport traffic pattern. And it gets like down in the weeds, side-by-side runways, grass on one side, all kinds of different considerations. Ultralights, the group to which we belong, we've got a traffic pattern at 500 feet. Okay, so have you heard a couple times I've told you that's high enough, don't go any higher, actually come down? The reason is because you're at that 500, 600 foot level, and above you is a stack for other airplanes. And I don't want you up underneath those guys. And the last few days, their pattern, so you're taking off in this field right here, right, launching that way, and they've been on 2-1 landing this way, their pattern's out over those fields. And that means as you climb upwards past 500 feet, you're starting to get towards their traffic pattern. And a lot of the times these guys will come in low. So that's the reason I was telling you, let's not go any higher. And anytime you're in an airport environment, you need to stick to 500 feet. And as you move away from it, you're free to climb higher. But in that zone around the airport, your designated traffic pattern is at 500 feet.
Or lower, correct?
Or lower, yeah. I mean, you don't have to transition the airport at 500 feet. If you also want to be high enough to avoid the traffic over the runway.
Do you guys carry an altimeter of any kind?
No, you'll get used to it. You'll just kind of get an idea. The tower's way over there, 4 miles away, are 1,000 feet, and you can, even this far away, you can look over and get an idea where you are. Let's see.
I like to use this reference. If I'm near an airport, I'm worried, I'm getting real stay low, and I'm at treetop level, so I'm gonna use that. I'm very, very good at trees. So that's kind of what it is.
This is a Bravo document that the alpha version of it got replaced last year, 2018. So I started including this because there's some things in here that changed that general aviation guys that haven't done any research in the last 20 years but are flying may not know. And one of the things that changed in here last year was this traffic pattern used to be 1,200 to 800, and it's 1,000 feet. Turboprops and jets are 1,500, single engine GAs 1,000, ultralights are 500. So there's this stack you're supposed to be in, and I don't know why they made this change. Maybe, hopefully it's because there's much more ultralight traffic out there, and by taking this band, 400-foot band, and squeezing it down to stay right here at 1,000, it gives ultralights more safety because they say, you stay at 500, you guys stay there. There's not that slop in between where I was supposed to be. So that's all in here. It's really worth reading. But again, the reason I included in here, there's some stuff about ultralights. The reason I included it is because you will likely go to an airport and people will be thinking like, I know the rules, and rules have changed in the last 18 months. And I've already encountered guys out here that don't know. We had one guy kind of jump down our throat about, he was applying his rules in a plane that goes 120 miles an hour to our rules. We weren't breaking any rules, but he was looking at us saying, I can't possibly fly right now. How can you guys? So some guys don't know the rules, particularly out of class. So a GA guy that's never flown ultralights and never learned about ultralight rules is going to apply his rules to you. Did you talk about Part 91 and 103?
Vaguely.
This is another thing, another bump you may encounter at airports. So there's this, remember we fall under Part 103, right? There's another part called Part 91 that is like a catch-all rule basket that everybody follows. It has stuff for like, if you are in an airplane, piloted by another pilot, Delta planes, if you're an air crew, all kinds of these, it's just a basket of rules. And in the beginning of it, it says none of these rules apply to vehicles operated under 103. What that means is you can possibly go to one of these airports and be making decisions that would go against the rules that another guy has to follow, and he thinks it's the catch-all basket. But he's never read the beginning that says, doesn't apply to 103. So that's kind of a nuance, but that and this document will help you understand what you're supposed to do in a little more detail.
So we carry a copy of 103.
Depending on what airport you're at, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a copy of some of your rules, because we've encountered it. We're out here all the time. Some of these some of these little airport communities are really, they're like a tough nut to crack. That's why I think it's important. You're a step ahead of the game if you at least know what's going on. You're not just blindly walking in and everybody's like, what the hell is this guy doing? You know, if you know what you're talking about, they're more likely to embrace you. I want to show you a couple other things about airports.
And do you see the airport manager, or who do you ask?
Good question. There's 4 types of airports. There are public and private owned and public and private use, or one of the 4 variations of those. So you can have public owned airport for public use. That means a public entity like the county or a municipality owns it and it's open to the public. There's also a publicly owned private use. It's pretty rare, but like if there's a sheriff's helipad, or if they keep state police drug interdiction aircraft at a little place and it's technically publicly owned by the taxpayer, but it's not for public use, it's rare. Then there's privately owned public use, and there's 2 ways that could be. This is a privately owned airport open to public use as a decision that the owner made. If he takes a federal funding from an FAA grant, part of those grant stipulations are that airport has to now be open to the public for the next 20 years, nothing you can do about it. So some of these private airports have taken grant money and they can't tell you no. Or really the way they have to tell you no is they have to convince the FAA that your presence there is a safety hazard. So yeah, you'd kind of talk to the manager, introduce yourself. If it's the Boone County Airport and it's owned by Boone County, the manager can't say you can't fly here. He can petition the FSDO in Indianapolis for this whole airspace the FAA tells you can't fly there, but the manager just can't say no if there's some stipulation about public use to it. However, if the manager's telling you can't fly here, I mean, it's not a great relationship if you're butting heads with the airport manager. So Avon Park is an airport I'm familiar with, so I'm going to use it as my example. It's down in Florida. I want to show you a few other bits of things about an airport, but we don't have them here at Franklin, really. Just some nomenclature, I guess.
So there's multiple runways.
Yeah, this one has multiple runways. Let me get to that, but first, the office at an airport isn't called an office, it's called an FBO. If you walk up, if you say the office, they'll kind of know you don't spend much time. Fixed-based operator, yeah. So if you go to the airport and say, I'm looking for the FBO, you suddenly have let everybody know that you know your way around an airport. It's a little thing, but if you're showing up in this really wacky craft that nobody's ever seen before, and you don't use the runway like everybody else, and God, it's fabric, and you also don't know anything about an airport, they're not going to want you there. If you at least act like you're a pilot and you know what you're talking about. Okay, so at FBO, almost all airports have a big concrete pad out in front of the FBO, and you'll see airplanes parked there. That's like long-term storage or short-term storage. They have tie-downs built into it. It's cheaper than renting a hangar. That's called the ramp. Okay, the gas pumps are almost always right there on the ramp by the FBO or the office. You know what taxiways are, right? Yeah, avenues for a plane to move that are not for takeoff and landing. And taxiways have a symbol on them that's kind of important. So let's say you go up to Boone County and talk to the airport manager, and the airport manager says, yeah, there's a big grass spot on the other side of the runway out there. You're welcome to drive your car over there, park on the other side, get it away from the runway. But yeah, you can just set up over there and take off on that big grass strip. But you got to cross the runway to get there. Just a hypothetical. And you're driving down the taxiway. There is a symbol, this thing. It's 2 lines, 2 solid lines, and then 2 sets of dashed lines. That's called the hold short line. This is the danger area. This is the good area. On the solid sides is good, the broken sides danger. That means, hey, guy, you're about to go out into an active runway. Are you sure? Stop. Listen to the radio. Look up and down the runway. Look up the glide slopes, because those guys can't stop if you bumble out there. Okay. Let's just go look at Boone County really quickly. I'm just curious, since that's pretty close to you. And since we're using it as our example here. Yeah, so it's not painted very well, but that's probably the old hold short line. That's the place that you'd want to stop. Make sure it's safe. You should always treat a runway, even if you think nobody's there, it's a hot runway. Yeah, always treat it. Pass quickly. So anyway, that's just an example, but if you went to Boone County, which looks like a really good place, I would consider that part runway and that part not really. That might be a good place to fly, and it's not terribly far away from you. So FBO, this is probably the FBO right here. That little building. The ramp right out here where the tie downs are. I don't see any fuel pumps. Hold short lines. Let's think about something here really quickly. Let's say that you took off down here by this, whatever it is, and you want to fly east. You're going to fly to your house. Maybe your wife dropped you off over here in, is that Lebanon? Your wife dropped you off in South Lebanon, and you're going to fly your paramotor home tonight, okay? That's a concern. The fact that that airport there is a concern, and it is a navigational consideration for you, right? What I want you to think about is a danger cone that extends off the ends of these runways. And 2 miles is not bad. That's a pretty good safe bet. Stay out of it. You should always be thinking, are there airports in my route? And am I going to transition through that airport in one of these cones? What's the best place to be? If I need to go from one side of this airport to the other, how do I do it? Kind of already talked about it. I'm going to go all the way out of my way and go right over the center. And you can do that at 500 feet, and you'll be underneath the traffic pattern of the one guys and above the stuff on the field, and you can go. But if you are out here, that's a really, really dangerous place to be. Those planes that are on final approach, they've got a fuselage around them. They can't see down where you're going to be. And you blend in so crazy. These gliders are bright colors, but it doesn't help. Like orange and red and blue, it's exactly what color the sky is at 7 o'clock at night. So you tend to just blend in, especially if you're below the horizon. So, yeah, think about that. If you were going to go for kind of a longer distance flight, actually Judson said, a student from earlier this year said, I'm going for a 30-mile flight. That's the kind of time you want to look and say, where am I going? Does my route take me in the glide slopes of that little airport there? I'm going to need to see it and go right over the top of that airport to make sure I'm not in somebody else's way. And that's where having a radio on board. You might call in and say, Boone County Airport, I'm a powered paraglider, 2 miles to the northwest. I'm doing a midfield crossing at 500 feet, and I'll be out of your way, Boone County. Right across the center. Everybody will think, oh, awesome, thanks, man. Let's see here.
But I would absolutely need comms to do that.
That's a pretty good question. If you went over at 500 feet, you'd be absolutely correct. But if those guys have been flying and hadn't looked at an aviation circular in the last 12 years and seen that's exactly where you're supposed to be, they might get upset with you. Another thing you can do is fly over at 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet is up above the pattern. You know there's no jets going into there or big turboprops. So, and their pattern's 1,500. So another way to transit the airport is 2,000 or 3,000 feet. But you still want to know that that danger cone is there. And the closer you get to the ground, the more you need to be aware that you have to stay out of there. If you're ever looking down if you can see this, the length of a runway down its long axis and you're in the air, you're in a really dangerous spot. Yeah. So radio frequencies, how to use it. Any questions about that? It's not meant to make you like super good at it. It's just.
I need to write those down so I can remember.
So you at Westfield, you're going to be on 1229. That happens to be the multicom. No big deal. You don't need to change anything. It's also the CTAF. So if you were to use a radio, you just put it on 122.9. Did you guys talk about AWAS?
No.
Okay. There's another frequency that is nested in the aviation band. Actually, 3 different types of things, but they all really do the same thing. So here at Indianapolis Metropolitan, there's AWOS, and it has a frequency 119.375. Airports that have a little bit more money than Westfield has can get these systems. So AWOS is Automated Weather Observation System. If you ever heard a weather band radio where it's the robotic, repetitive message, that's all it is. There are more expensive versions of that, and they tend to be at bigger airports. Like here at Indianapolis, they have ATIS, that's Automated Terminal Information System. You get the same information from it. There's one more that's in between those two called ASO. Here's one at Shelbyville. Shelbyville has an Air Reserve helicopter base there. That's probably why theirs is upgraded a little bit. But Automated Surface Observation System. It doesn't matter what they're called. They basically do the same thing. You would get on it and listen to the weather report on your ab band radio. The nice thing about it, though, is they have phone numbers. So on SkyVector, if I want to find out some more information about this airport, and particularly the AWAS there, so I can call it, 124, I'm sorry, I'm going to look up MQJ. MQJ is the airport designator. You following me? At Indianapolis Regional. The reason I'm doing this is because let's say I'm sitting at my house. I did my weather thing, but it looks foggy outside. I can know whether I have 1 mile visibility at that airport or an airport near me by just calling the AWAS. Or maybe I'm getting ready to go. It looks like it might be windy, but from my house, the trees block all the wind. Out here, the wind is there. So you may be able to call a local airport that's more opened up and see, are the winds high or are they good right now? And we'll just do it really quickly. Let's look at Indianapolis Metropolitan instead. It's a little bit closer to you, I think. Where are you? Carmel, yeah. Yeah, so Indianapolis Metro is your closest one. So we're going to look up UMP. Oh, in the airport directory. Oops. UMP.
That's over a really congested area.
It is, but the weather that you pick up there is so close that you could use it for Westfield. I guess that's what I'm getting at here. So the AWAS here is 119.375. If you were in the air, you could probably get it on a handheld, but handhelds don't do well without line of sight. So if it's 10 miles away on the ground, you won't get it until you're up at altitude. But we can call. If one of you guys can call 317-842-3911. And we'll just listen to it. It's a little bit cryptic, but quite a bit of information in it.
It's on a loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis Metro Airport, automated weather observation 2057 Zulu, weather, wind 120 at 5, visibility 10, clear below 12,000, temperature 6 Celsius, dew point 0, altimeter 3035.
Okay, so that's the whole repeating thing. That's it. It's all kind of cryptic in there. You can kill it. Let me show you. So our time is 2057 Zulu. We're 4 hours offset, so it's 4:57. Yep, local. Winds were 120 at 5 miles an hour. That means our wind is always from which it's blowing. So it's coming out of the east-southeast at 5 miles an hour. Awesome. Visibility is 10 miles. That's as high as it goes. That means it's crystal clear. If they were to say visibility half a mile, what does that mean? Why go? Yeah, it's going to be a foggy morning, and fog won't lift off until our 2-hour window's over. Clear above that, no clouds, 6-degree temperature, 0-degree dew point. And then this, if you decide to fly with an app, that's the setting for the barometric altimeter. Okay, your phone probably has if it's 2 or 3 years old, an 8 has it, yeah. So you can get a barometer, and you'll see right now it's calibrated at 30.40, or it's reading 30.40. Sea level is 29.95, right? So that means we're higher pressure than a normal sea level, right? That's why we have the stable atmosphere right now, because we have higher than normal pressure. But if I wanted to use this altimeter, I can go into the settings on it, and it will want a calibration pressure. And here I can move that up or down. What did we say? 30.35. That's as close as I can get. And it will, that gives me MSL altitude. Or pretty close. It's not an FAA rated device. And that's kind of wrong right now. But when you're in the air, it's only about 150 feet off.
Would you say we're like at 800?
I think we're at 749, yeah. So it's a bit off. That's okay. It's not FAA rated, but hey, that will tell you what your MSL altitude is if you're out flying around, and it's calibrated now. That's what that last number, pressure altitude or density altitude 30.35. That's all that's for. So that's a tool that you might be able to use if you don't know whether it's worth going out, loading everything up and heading out to the field. Maybe it's on the edge, and you find out, it's actually nice over there, or it's really windy over at the airport. Anything else here? I think that's it. As with anything, that's the last bit of ground school we have. With any of these things, weather, airspace, wings, motors, whatever, as you get out and do this on your own, this stuff is going to be forgotten and pop back up. So call us, text us, whatever. We're always here as a resource. I know this is a lot of stuff to take in, but at least that's a basis for you arrive at Westfield and you have an idea. You can listen to the radio and start putting some puzzle pieces together instead of it being like, oh, this is Chinese. What the hell are they talking about? Cool? Okay, good.
So did anybody call that at all?
No, not at all. Yeah.
Weird.
And it's usually a school plane here, so usually they're pretty good about making the calls. If somebody comes in tonight, and I remember, I'll key up and let you hear the communication, and then I'll point out in the air, okay, so he's on downwind, and you'll be able to, once you kind of get a grip on it, it won't matter whether you're on the ground or up in the air, you know kind of where that imaginary pattern is, and you just look over and see the guy.
No.
The FAA considers a close call 1 mile. So, I mean, that's for two airplanes. If they're head on, going 120 each, their closure rate's 240 miles an hour. A mile, it goes by pretty quickly. But, you know, if there's some of these RVs are going 200 miles an hour up there coming out of this airport, and a mile closure's fast.
Yeah, with us, over the years, a couple near the runway.
So that goes into a bit more of the etiquette. When you're at the airport, it's not a mile. When you're up at cruise altitude, as you get towards the airport, the planes have to be closer and closer and closer together. But if you're up at 2,000 feet and a guy buzzes past you 300 yards away, you'll think, holy crap, he almost hit me. Holy crap. When you get down here, the reason we had you hanging out over there is not because we want to avoid a collision, but we want to give every single bit of questionable indication to every single pilot, which was the guy coming in, that you have no intention of getting any closer to his approach path. So that's why we had you kind of out there doing orbits. And you want to do that too. Remember, you're last in the pecking order. You've got to wait to come in until everybody else is done. And part of that is, if you don't have a radio in particular, how do I announce to everybody that I have no intention of bumbling into that runway right now? And doing that is staying off to the side and doing circles. They know you're not coming. Yeah, so that's why we did that. Okay, good. Any questions?
Oh, crap, isn't it? That's a lot.
We are like 10 minutes away from our 20-degree winter window, so let's go get some gear and fly.